Good day, everyone. My name is Dr. Ina Khan, as you all know, and we are today live now because before that we start. I thought we should do Facebook live on. I used to do Facebook live on different forum that is called StreamYard. So sometime it gets started. So today I thought that why not I should start this on. Um, I should do this on Facebook Live, and we have a very lovely guest. Let me see if she came her way in. Her name is Jennifer Freddy. She is from Canada, and she is working with issues as anxiety and chronic worry, panic and hyperarousal, depression and low mood, trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and complex trauma, that is called CPTSD, and childhood abuse and neglect, attachment issues, grief and loss, high stress and life management, relationship issues, separation and divorce, anger issues, self-harm, self-defeating patterns, and sleep issues, work issues, and life transition and parenting as well. And I have seen her work that is actually evolving around parenting, and I'm hopeful that she join us. The moment she will join me, I will ask her, please Jennifer, if you see me, if you are here, can you please send me a message so that I give you request to come in the last session. I think she is looking for ways to come in, and I hope she find her way. Or let me try to send her. You can ask me question. Sorry. Let me just take the. You can ask me. Okay. The moment she will join us, I will ask her to. Let me try to send her the link. Hi Jennifer, hope she find the link. I just sent her the link, and as you all know, today is the topic about trauma, a life-changing experience, and I would like to ask her question about childhood trauma as well, because like she's working with parenting and she have a lot of knowledge about how childhood trauma is going to affect your whole personality, your whole life. That's why the topic is how it's going to transform your life, and it's very important to understand that the trauma that a child get in their childhood time period, it have long effect. So it doesn't mean that if you're 20 years old or 30 years old, you went through under some trauma, any trauma is not valid. Your trauma will be valid. Okay Jennifer, if you see me now, can you please send me a message so that I ask you to join me? Okay, yes. Oh, so she joined me. I'm just going to add her in our live stream, and see. The moment she will join us, we'll start discussion about. And I was talking about childhood. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, Hila.
How are
Good to see you. I'm great. How are you?
I'm also good, and you're looking so different. I have seen your picture on your website. On the website, you look different, and on the Instagram, you look different. But the one thing is positive about you is you're looking lovely everywhere.
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Some of those pictures are older, so.
I don't think so, because they look so updated.
Thank you.
Well, it's all about positivity. When you're positive and then you take life positive, then it shows on your and let settle it down. So when you're positive about life, then it shows in your personality as well. So I was just sharing about your I just took your introduction from the website. I have seen you're doing a lot of work on the trauma. You did a lot of work with the parenting. So like I sent you the question that was mostly about parenting, and what I believe is that the trauma you get in your childhood is have a lot of effect in your life. Later
Yeah.
on it will affect you. That is the point. But it does not mean that the trauma you're getting in your later life, for example, if you're 20 years old and you're 30 years old and you and went under some trauma, it doesn't mean that you're not going to affect it from that. The trauma is still valid and the trauma is still affecting you. So let's start from the basic. I would like you to define
Okay.
what is trauma.
Well, so it's a big question, but it's a good question. So trauma used to be, I think, actually thought of as like the classic kind of post-traumatic stress disorder where people would go to war and war vets
Mm-hmm.
would come back and they'd have trauma, or you'd get, you know, post-traumatic stress from a car accident or a natural disaster. And people sort of saw trauma only through that lens. But now how
Mm-hmm.
we understand trauma is it's an event that a person
Mm-hmm.
goes through that
Mm-hmm.
overwhelms their nervous system. So it could be any event really that overwhelms
Mm-hmm.
the person's nervous system to a point
Mm-hmm.
where they didn't feel like they could escape that trauma and they didn't feel like they could fight it off. And so their
Mm-hmm.
nervous system, their brain and their body really had to shut them down and put them into a freeze state while they went through that
Mm-hmm.
trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
not being able to escape from trauma and going into freeze after the event stops, sometimes nervous systems get stuck in that freeze mode and
Mm-hmm.
the brain isn't able to process that trauma properly. And so trauma symptoms start to develop. And we see these in lots of different ways in both children and adults.
Yeah.
So some basic symptoms of trauma are avoidance,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that after the event, the person starts avoiding things that normally they would have been okay with. So they might start
Mm-hmm.
avoiding people or
Mm-hmm.
places or events or even leaving their home. They
Mm-hmm.
may avoid doing things that before they were totally okay to do. Trauma
Mm-hmm.
also involves something we call intrusion. An
Mm-hmm.
intrusion means that I'm having a lot of images in my mind that feel very upsetting or are memories of that event, or I'm having a lot
Mm-hmm.
of thoughts that are negative and I can't kind of get out of those thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And nightmares and bad dreams and flashbacks, those are all intrusion sort of symptoms. We also get into different states inside that
Mm-hmm.
make me feel like I'm revving too high or I'm
Mm-hmm.
too low. So, for example, we see people after trauma become what we call hyper aroused, which means that
Mm-hmm.
my brain and nervous system now have a chemistry that keeps me really panicky or
Mm-hmm.
anxious or angry or easily frustrated. I'm really
Mm-hmm.
hyper vigilant, meaning I'm watchful for anything bad that could happen. And I'm getting to needing to control a lot of things. It's hard for my nervous system and my body to rest and relax. I have a hard time with sleep, all of those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things. Or the person can go into what's called hypoarousal, which means that
Mm-hmm.
I just feel really shut down and
Mm-hmm.
disconnected. It's hard for me to connect to people that I normally felt safe and good with. I don't really want to do
Mm-hmm.
much. My energy level's low. I might be feeling depressed. And then the last thing is a negative mood or negative cognition. And that means that my thoughts and my mood often feel very negative. And it's not where I can talk myself out of it. It's not that I'm, you know, that I'm not trying hard enough. It's that my brain now is really oriented to bad things and negative things. And I'm starting to feel bad about myself because I went through that trauma and I couldn't escape it. And now I don't know what to do. Yeah, especially for children. I mean, it's true for us as adults too, but for children, they have a hard time, you know, being able to talk about what's going on. And so a lot of times we note trauma more in terms of behavior than kids being able to articulate what they're going through. So if we're talking about childhood trauma, we as adults or parents or helpers really have to understand the language that children use to talk about when something inside doesn't feel good after a trauma. Trauma can be big events. They can be single events, like an accident or a natural disaster or exposure to violence or something along those lines, a single event that was really difficult. But trauma can also happen over time. Even if a child's living in a home where there's yelling or violence or fear or neglect or abuse, or the parents really aren't engaged much with the child. They don't really understand the child's emotional needs, so the child has to kind of figure those out for themselves. Over time, that nervous system becomes traumatized, and we call that complex or developmental trauma, which means that the child's having frightening or overwhelming experiences in their home during their childhood that are actually getting into their development and becoming a part of their personality. And not everybody understands that part of trauma. They kind of familiar with that classic PTSD accident, you know, war kind of thing. But when we talk more about these quieter ways that children's nervous systems can become traumatized, or adults' nervous systems can become traumatized, that's often a new definition of trauma for people.
And you know, when you start talking about PTSD, so that's how I also came to understand what trauma is. Before that, people may not talking about, because there was a time when there was an active war in few countries. Maybe it was Afghanistan war and Iraq war at that time as well. So at that time, we read in the newspapers and we read in the books that those people, those those soldiers who came back to their home, they came with the trauma. They have suicide attempts and they are not the person they were in their, you know, in their past. So that's how people start talking about trauma. So that is PTSD for us. So if we talk about and you're very much right that we don't even understand that the thing we are naming depression and anxiety is actually trauma. I mean, you would normally see people there all the time saying, I have depression, I have anxiety. But when you cut down into pieces, then it might just start from one event. I mean, anxiety is a whole personality. Depression is a whole personality. And trauma is an event. And just because of your trauma, you could have anxiety, you could have depression as well. So those people who don't understand the fact that, and even those therapists, they don't understand the fact that, and there's another important thing over here as well. People think that if it's a childhood trauma, it means it's older, then we should not talk about that. Because I just, I just heard this thing from my patient today in the session. She said that I was asking about her father, her relationship with her father, and she was saying that no, it's fine. My father is like that. My father. Then when I started thinking about it, then I came to know that somehow it is some form of, you could say, abusive relationship between parents. And then I said that, was it toward you with the children as well? Then she would say sometimes he would do that. I mean, he was just coming toward siblings, but he did not came toward herself. He just talk about her elder sibling, that he would do that and he would do that. So I mean, she was in a denial phase or whatever it was.
Right. When children are growing and we are really, childhood is such an important time of life, and early childhood especially. That's often news to parents. They sometimes think early problems kids won't remember, and then that's fine. But we know that the nervous, and we know that the brain and the nervous system, even if my memory is not forming yet, the nervous system records my experiences with my parents and other people and the world right from birth and even before. And
Yeah,
so
exactly. Because
children,
I just read
right,
about that as well. People
yep,
remember the thing when they were in their mother womb, and they remember everything.
that's right,
Means what they were doing,
right,
what she was doing. So that's how, because nervous system
that's
is very
right,
complex. At at
that's
three
right.
years, at 3 months, the nervous system is already formed. So don't think that the child is not born. Even this also happened with when I'm working with because I was working with children, adult both. With children, when I'm talking to parents and those who with special needs, parents would start
Right.
talking about them that they don't listen to us, they're not obedient, and they're really messy, and they do stuff like that. And at moment,
Right.
I just look at the face expression of that child, and I tell them they
Right.
understand. They said they don't understand. I said no, they understand. Just look at the facial
Right.
expression of that child.
That's
So
right.
it's not about that a
Yeah.
child has don't. Uh,
Yeah. The childhood understanding, I sometimes say to the parents I work with, parenting isn't a really good word for what we're doing. Like, we're raising little human beings and their brains and nervous systems from scratch.
yeah,
And so,
yeah,
and the nervous system is recording everything that, we're experiencing. So if I grow to fear my father, or I
mm-hmm,
notice that my parents don't have a good marriage and they're always tense with each other, or I'm often compared to a sibling and made to feel like I'm not good enough, or you look only at my behavior, you don't wonder what's causing my behavior, and you just punish my behavior. There's this whole thing that we're missing out on in understanding what's causing that behavior. And a lot of times, parents come to their own parenting without a lot of their own experience of having their feelings understood, or having their parents be patient with them, or reflecting on what might really be going on inside of me. I was only
yeah,
noticed for when I did something good or when I did something bad. And so in the development of a child, their nervous system actually misses out on learning some very important things, like what my feelings are, how to notice what those are, how to label my feelings, and how to
yeah,
understand where they come from and what they really need. So instead, some
exactly.
kids really get a childhood where the only thing that's noticed is their behavior, or the outcomes of what they're doing. And there's this whole inner world that doesn't develop, and that's part of the brain then that doesn't really develop. So these kids enter adulthood where all they know to do is just notice their own behavior and feel they're either doing something right or doing something wrong, and that's it. And that just generally creates anxiety and depression. Because if I'm
Yeah,
always doing everything right, then it's okay, but that's really, really hard. And so when I don't do something right, I've only been trained to notice my behavior. So when I do things that don't end up being okay, I really get down on myself. I really start to have anxiety. I really start to have depression. And to your point, it actually may not be like classic anxiety or depression. It may be an
yeah,
outcome of developmental trauma, and the
yeah.
person doesn't know who they are inside. And so that's where the healing and the therapy starts to happen.
And sometimes I would also like to, it's a question and it's a comment as well. Sometimes the child or the person, because we are covering both population, because a child is one day adult and adult was one day a child. So sometimes it happens that maybe you're not the direct victim of that trauma. You're not the direct victim of that event. You might have seen something happen in your surrounding
That's right.
and that caused that
That's right.
trauma. So I think
That's right.
it's it's also going to affect you, and it's also going to change your personality, and it's also going to change the way,
That's
because
right.
from transforming, because we are not talking about a fruit that you are going to transform that into juice. Over here we are talking about a
Yes, right.
personality that
Right.
we are going to transform into different personality, because we don't get
Right.
this idea that humans are not robot. I mean, it don't have
Right.
push button, stop, on, off.
Right.
It never
Right.
works like that.
Exactly.
because these are some real
Exactly.
life experiences, and you have to go through this, and you have to talk about this. I mean, people are
That's right.
so much, so into unvalidating their own experiences. I mean, they don't
That's
even
right.
understand that what they are going through.
That's right. And they've not, so sometimes parents, just because they don't understand how human beings develop, right? You that information hasn't been given to them. And so they sometimes feel a bit like children are like machines that by the time they're 25, they'll just be all grown and all of the things they'll need will just naturally develop. And what we now know is that all of the things a child needs inside of them too, in their sense of self, in their emotional world, in their social world, all the parts of the brain that help us with that, those really are developed primarily by the parents. And so, and so if parents come to their parenting and they don't know how to grow these things inside a child, their child won't have those things. And the natural outcome of development, emotional development, where emotional development hasn't, personality development hasn't really developed completely, the natural outcome of that is a person who feels very anxious by the, in the world, they feel overwhelmed by the world, and they have a really narrow view of what makes me good or not. They often get very black and white in their thinking. I'm either good and successful, or I'm bad and a failure, and that's it. And so they really strive really hard to become something that their inside world is really missing. So a lot of times when adults have gone through childhood trauma or their parents haven't developed them enough, let's say, part of the deal is they're just learning that they have feelings and what those are called, learning that they can have needs and those can be met. And they're really back in time, kind of catching up on their emotional development. Some parents don't value emotions, or some parents don't value, connection as a part of growing a child. They think it's better to grow them in terms of what they can do and how they can perform and how they look to other people. But that part of the brain, what we sometimes call emotional intelligence, if parents are doing things that either don't grow emotional intelligence, or they're doing things that frighten the child, or the child's watching really difficult things all the time, the child's not developing the skills and the parts of the brain they need. Instead, they're developing really a defensive personality. They're really sort of developing a sense that the world is a dangerous place and people are dangerous and not to be trusted, and I'm not allowed to talk about that, I'm not allowed to have feelings about that, whatever it is. And so they end up really entering the world with a lot of fear and a lot of overwhelm and missing a lot of skills that help them deal with day-to-day life.
Exactly.
You're,
And
you're
sometimes
right.
they just project those feelings instead of, owning these feelings, they project these feelings on other people. So that is
That's right.
a dangerous form of, projection of your own trauma onto other people. So because you start,
Right.
it's not just you are becoming a negative, or other people are also affecting from you, and people don't realize that what and how their behaviors are affecting other
Right.
people, how
Right.
they're going to change about that. Because from the day when you should say, you should not talk, and let me just give you an example. If there's a situation where you have to say no, so you are taught that socially you should not say no. You should not say no to the parent, stuff like that. So
Mm.
if there is a situation came where there's a chance that a person is going into trauma, let's talk about a very sensitive topic over here. Let's say it's a child abuse. I'm talking about physical or sexual abuse. If a child don't
Right.
want to go to a place, and parents are insisting him to go to that place because it
Right.
is a live-in trauma for your whole life. I'm not talking about rape,
Right.
because rape may be one-time incident, but if we talk about abuse, then it is going to stay with that child for quite a long time.
Yes.
So what we are going to
It
do
could
about
stay
that? Think
forever.
that how we are going to, yeah, it could stay forever. Even it is going to affect your own relationship with your wife, even your children, and it could affect you at large. People don't understand this idea that they should start listening to their children, they should start talking to their children,
Right.
and they should
Right.
listen At least, okay, don't do anything, but at least if you start listening to your child, the child will
Yes,
come to
agreed.
you next time when he is in problem.
Yes. So I was thinking that just as you were saying that, one of the things that I teach parents when they're trying to build some of these missing emotional skills and social skills and things inside their child is don't be so quick to notice behavior and correct that. Don't be so quick to do that.
Yeah.
Slow down. It's hard for some parents to do this because nobody did it for them when they were kids, but slow down
Yeah.
and listen. Ask your child, how are you feeling? What's happened? You seem like you don't want to go to Uncle so and so. I wonder why that is.
Yeah.
You know, what does it feel like to be around that person? And really slowing down and listening to the child and asking them questions that help them better understand their own inner world, helps me better understand what's going on inside my child. And then my child feels heard and they feel like I'm a safe person they can come to. And when problems are happening, I can be a person they can tell about those problems. And then it's not secret and kept inside. A lot of the trauma, a lot of the adults I work with who have survived trauma, different kinds of childhood trauma, will say, I never felt safe around my parents. I always had to keep everything in. I couldn't tell them what was going on, or sometimes I didn't know what was going on inside me.
Yeah.
They never gave me that language. And so I had to suffer a lot and do things I didn't want to do and put up with some really hard things. And I had to do that for years. So by the time they become 25 or 30 or 40, they've held that stuff in for a long time. And that nervous system has been having to cope with all of that. So it's hard to
Yeah.
deal with normal day-to-day life. And I've got all of this
Yeah.
stuff inside that hasn't been fixed or resolved or heard or understood. I didn't understand it. So I'm just coping every day. And my nervous system is having anxiety or depression. That's really hard to do every single day. And so
And
parents
okay,
really learn how to listen to their children. Yeah.
mhm. Okay, so there's a two, three question. One lady saying, you're talking about asking about ADHD. I have a parent support group. In that group, we are talking about ADHD. You can go to that group. It will be tomorrow at 6 p.m. Saturday, tomorrow is Saturday, 6 p.m. I hope it's, yes, it is 10:56 now. So tomorrow, 6 p.m., I will share the link of that group as well. And Hina Malik, that today the topic of presentation is trauma, how is transforming the life. Okay, I would like to ask you a very important question, which is like you're talking about, okay, I would like to say some ask you a question, and I think it's very relevant over here. Like you talk about a trauma which is with you for maybe 20, 30 years, and what I
Yep.
feel is that it is going to change your brain as well, because if you have seen the PTSD brain, we have seen the
Right.
neuroimaging of depressive brain, we have seen the neuroimaging of brain with autism. I mean, other things are not changed, but the neuroimaging could be changed, because neuroimaging is something, those areas which are functional. We have seen about anxiety, we have
Right.
seen about depression. I think it is
Right.
going to change and transform your brain a lot. And
For sure.
what you're going to do with the brain, what you're going to do with the brain, which is now physically changed now. Because if you talk about
Yep.
psychosis, the brain is totally changed. And
Right. Well, trauma,
people,
we know for
Mhm.
sure. Oh, yes, we know for sure that trauma changes the brain, whether you go through trauma as a teenager or an adult, and certainly as a child, because the child's brain is forming during the first 25 years of life. And so if you're going through a lot of difficulty or trauma or really upsetting, frightening events that you can't escape from, that's actually growing your brain in a traumatic way, and it's also preventing really important parts of your brain from forming. And so what happens for children when they go through trauma, whether it's a single big event or whether they're in a home or a society or among people at school where they're having a lot of frightening events they can't get away from, what happens to
Yeah,
that
exactly.
brain is the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain just
Yeah,
behind
exactly this
the
area, this area.
right. And it's such an important part of the brain because it's the part of the brain that allows us human beings to manage our emotions, to have flexibility, to have empathy and compassion and understand other
Decision
people.
making,
It helps us
decision making,
decision making,
important.
problem solving,
Yeah,
right? All of the
yeah,
really important things that we need to be good human beings. And that
exactly.
actually, that part of the brain can actually not grow or be smaller in size or not wired up
Okay.
well when we go through trauma. What happens is another part of the brain actually really activates. And you probably know that it's the part of the brain sort of in the right lower, middle and lower part of the brain. There's an area in there called the limbic area, and there's some
Yeah,
lower parts
exactly,
of the
exactly.
brain, and those parts of the brain actually get a lot of work if you're going through trauma. And
Yeah,
those are the parts of the brain that activate fight and flight and freeze and
exactly,
submitting.
exactly.
Yep, and high need. And so what happens is the child now grows up living out of the part of the brain that makes us do fight, flight, freeze. They're not getting the stuff
Exactly,
they need to grow this part of the
exactly.
brain. And so by the time I'm 25, I anger easily. I have a lot of anxiety. I think about a lot of worries. I avoid
And
things.
you have,
I'm using
frozen
drugs.
shoulder. You know that frozen shoulder as well. Frozen
Yes,
shoulder,
absolutely.
nausea, just because of that
Absolutely.
thing.
Yes, correct. My body starts to have a posture of trauma. I'm often
Yeah,
braced and tight and can't relax. I don't rest. I need to use drugs and alcohol to calm me down so I can sleep at night. Or I'm frozen.
exactly.
I don't like being around people. I fear easily. And if people still don't understand that, I end up getting criticized for natural outcomes of traumatic experiences, and it can loop on that. So we really, when people have a traumatized brain and they start to think about therapy, what we're really doing is starting off by helping that brain get some of what it needed, in childhood or in growing up years. And that is, we're listening, we're teaching them about their brain, and we're teaching them about what they should really have, what they deserve, what their rights are. We're talking about how what they went through was not okay, because sometimes they don't know that. They think abuse and violence is normal.
And
Everybody goes
there's
through
another thing about brain as well. Like this, if you see the development of the human, that developmental theory I'm talking about, the complex theory, difference of human brain and animal brain. It start growing from
Yeah,
lower side to upper side. So prefrontal
that's right.
cortex is the only area that make it different from the animal. So
That's right.
we are not saying that somebody is,
That's right.
we are not using that, but a person is, if he have underdeveloped brain. And there's another thing as well. It's a very common thing why we do practice a lot of things, so that it become part of our memory and our neural pathway develop like that. But see, a person who was dysfunctional for a lot of time of his life, maybe 25 years, 30 years, means that his neurons are dead too. What is going to do about that neuron? Because at some age, neuron degeneration is going to stop. So what is going to do? Maybe the attack of Alzheimer, maybe some other stroke attack as well. So it is not just a psychological problem; it is a physical problem
No,
as well. And I think now people need to
that's
understand
right.
that psychological problem are not just psychological problem; they are physical
Right,
problems too. They are
right. I
waking
do
you
tell
for
my
24
clients.
hours.
Right. I do tell my clients, this is more than just your mind. This is more than just making different choices or doing something different, or just telling yourself to get over it. Because the brain is the problem. The brain is wired now to be anxious all the time and to expect dangerous things all the time, to uh, think people are not very safe, and to feel like you're going to be judged all the time, and to feel like you're going to be beaten, or whatever it is. And so that brain just stays ready to fight or flight or freeze. And so so when people are going through trauma, they'll say, logically, I know I live in a safe home now. Logically, I know I have a husband or a wife who's good to me. Logically, I know I can go to work and I can be liked and safe with people, but my brain and body don't know that yet. And so I only feel like I'm in danger all the time. Even if I'm not, I have this inside feeling that the world is not safe. The world is mean and cruel. The world is a place you have to protect yourself from. And so I always meet the world with fight responses or flight
Exactly.
responses, or I'm freezing, frozen, and numb and shut down, and that's it. So you're
Exactly.
having anxiety and depression when really these things, as you said a minute ago, may well be a trauma response, not an anxiety or
Yeah.
depression disorder necessarily. And so
Because
when we
it's
go to
so easy. So everybody is labeling everything like trauma, anxiety, like anxiety and depression, so that you stop validating that there could be anything as well. It's not about you have low mood. You have seen people
right,
who are so happy, who look so happy, who look so happening, and they are going under some trauma. They're battling
yeah,
inside, and just
that's right,
because to maintain that social image, they cannot talk about
that's
someone.
right,
And I'm working with a
right,
mother, and she used to say that I cannot tell somebody my trauma because they're going to take something from me. they I
right,
have a foster child, and
right,
they're going to take that child from me. Even I'm not in the position to take
right.
therapy as well.
Yeah. Um, Now, I don't know, you're in Pakistan, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes? Yes. So I'm in North America
I'm
near Toronto.
Yeah.
And so in my culture, going to therapy is pretty accepted. There's still some people who feel not so comfortable with it, but we're understanding this better. And so we're saying to people, you need to go to therapy because that will help change and grow that traumatized brain that have gone through so much. It's just still circling in the trauma. I don't know if Pakistan has open acceptance of people going to therapy or not, or probably just
Not
no.
that much, not at all. Very
Not
little.
that much.
We are
Okay.
struggling for that. That's
Okay.
the struggle we are
And
into.
so,
It's not about,
right, and
maybe we don't have to struggle
that's
that
really
much for our with our patients. We have to struggle more for the people to accept that fact. So that advocacy work
yes,
is
right.
going on.
Right. So people, probably older people or other generations where you never showed a problem, you couldn't talk about feelings, you couldn't talk about stress, you had to put on a brave face and look like all was well and shove everything down.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you can hear where flight and freeze are what help you do that, right? There's a chemistry in your body and brain that has to change every time you suck something down or put something away and hide it.
Yeah.
And so when people are going to therapy, sometimes they're beginning and learning that it's okay to go to therapy. And in fact, it's really important because it's not just about talking about sadness. It's not a thing to go to therapy. It's actually where you go and learn how to change your brain and nervous system and grow up your brain and nervous system. It's really been traumatized for a long time. And it really is working properly and it's making it so hard for you. And so even making therapy a really normal, important, medical thing. It's not just a mind thing. It's not crazy. It's not being crazy. It means that you have a brain that still isn't, that prefrontal cortex, that front part of your brain hasn't gotten everything it needs to grow properly. So you're sort of stuck in trauma all the time, fight, flight, or freeze. And you can actually correct that, but you have to go to therapy with a skilled therapist who knows how to work with that. And we can, even in older age, change our brains. And that's really we've gone through stuff
Yeah.
that's been overwhelming or frightening, or you didn't get to talk about feelings or your thoughts, nobody really listened to you, you understood. That is going to change your brain. So that's why therapy becomes so important.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's not even about just about other people listening to you. You are going to that thing. The thing is that, like you said, that it's about fight, flight, or freeze. And here's another important thing: as when we talk about fight and flight, then we solely reject the concept of homeostasis, that your body is going to react to that fight and flight response, and everybody reaction is different. You could get some panic like feeling, you can get some nausea, panic
Right,
attacks. Even I have there was
right,
a patient came to me, and he was having some kind of that kind of trauma. He saw his mother dead, then there was a COVID situation, and he have seen 2 3 family member that was died because of that situation. And the thing was that he get into
right.
COVID as well, along his sister and brother. So
Oh,
that was a live-in trauma, and we have seen that a lot of people were into trauma at that situation, and people are still suffering and going through that thing, and people are still healing from that trauma. So he said that
yeah,
uh, he said that I went to the doctor. My heartbeat was so fast. Even I was able to listen to my heartbeat. It was that fast. Like,
Yeah, right. You're right.
and
You're right.
on ECG it was
Yeah,
normal.
trauma.
And on ECG it was normal. He said that doctor said to me that it's okay. You're normal. You just go and take some kind of, relax and you will be fine. But he said that I can feel what is going with me. And you know what he said, that okay, I'm going to the other country. I'm going to the other state. I will be fine. I said, you are just saying I am not going to recommend you that. You should continue your therapy. He did not pay attention to that aspect. So I said that I respect your decision. It's your own choice. And after 1 or 2 weeks, he contacted me back. And he said that I am in
Okay.
worse condition.
Yeah.
I cannot cope up with anything.
Sure.
So then we start
Yeah.
doing work
When
on that,
you
and then
when
we
you
start, So the thing was that it was not just fight and flight, it was the aftermath of that incident which was going to affect him, because it is not always about, like you talk about PTSD, it's not about always about flashbacks, that you're going to have flashback, we are going to night terror disorder. Few people have night terror disorder,
right,
few people have sleep apnea, people cannot eat, people have digestive issues and stuff like that.
right.
The real thing is that how you're going to cope with that trauma. That is the point, that how you're going to
Yes,
cope up with that trauma.
that's right.
And if it is therapy, then people would say that therapy is a long process. Like sometimes it is very difficult to make other people understand that therapy is so important, that it
Yes,
is going to transform you into other person, into other level. But people are so much doubting
right,
their
right,
own self, because for their whole life people doubt them. Nobody trusts
right.
them. That's why they're not trusting their
Well,
own feelings. So
it takes right. It takes a lot to after you've been through some kind of trauma, whether again it's a big event that really does look traumatic, or it's this, years of living with someone who's kind of frightening, or you never know what what person they're going to be. Happy 1 minute, really angry the next, or whatever it is. And so, right, you can live with trauma symptoms for a while. And anxiety and depression and all that kind of stuff. You're right. It can also be things like digestion problems, stomach issues, body aches and pains, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. It can be intense shyness. There's a lot of symptoms of trauma that also look medical or physical or subtle, and
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
people go to the doctor to try and fix those, and whatever medicine they get or whatever medical treatment they get, it doesn't work because it's a trauma symptom, not really it's not really come from a physiological problem. It's come from a trauma experience that has impacted the physiology.
Yes, it is psychophysiological basically. It is psychophysiological basically.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes. And so, yeah, so when we go to, sometimes people think that therapy is about talking about all your personal stuff and then having to talk about all of the hard things you went
Yeah.
through. And actually, what we understand now is trauma therapy is best when the person is going into the therapy room and their brain and nervous system are having the experiences they should have had either after the trauma or during their growing up years as a child. And so it takes a bit because people come to therapy really, as you just said, very distrustful, and they've never had anybody maybe
Yeah.
really listen to them. They've never really been understood. They sometimes the therapist will understand them, and the person doesn't have to say anything, and they feel weird because nobody's ever understood me that deeply before. Nobody's ever let me talk about my
Exactly.
feelings.
They
I don't
question
even know what
even.
my feelings are. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so when you're patient and you're calm and
Exactly.
somebody's there and you want to trust them so badly, but you're still, in that state of, are they going to hurt me eventually? So therapy takes time, but really we're going to therapy not to talk about all the traumas in heavy detail. In fact, we don't want to do that. We want to help give the brain and nervous system those
Yeah.
experiences they should have had either growing up or after the trauma event happened. And that can be really, really powerful for people because that sense of helplessness that sense of I can't do anything, that sense of I'm so alone, I have to do this all myself, that actually can change that feeling. And you can start to feel like I matter and my feelings are okay. And I can move through this horrible thing or this difficult thing that happened to me. And I can trust this therapist sitting across from me, and they're not going to tell anybody anything, and they aren't going to judge me. Whew, and that's a new, like a relieving
Exactly.
feeling, but
That's the
also
point.
very new feeling,
That is the point.
right? Very new feeling for a lot of people. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there is one important thing as well, that like I was working with a patient, and he was kind of a self-made man. Like he went to some other place in very young age, maybe it was 16 or 17 years of age, and he went under some kind of trauma experience, and he would say that, look at me, I came from other country, I came from other place, and I am so self-sufficient, and I'm so powerful, and I'm so, you could say, powerful in the sense that I empowered myself. I'm so empowered, I have a lot of money, I can do anything. How could I get into that trauma experience? How am I'm not
Right,
able
right,
to fight that trauma? That is a place
right.
when they start denying themselves, and they are too hard on themselves, and they cannot forgive
Right.
themselves that why they are feeling the way they are feeling now. They
Well,
still
when I talk
question
to people
themselves.
like that,
Like it is a
yes,
crime, it is a
when I
guilt to feel like that.
right, when I talk to people like that who say, sometimes people will say, I'm really glad I went through this hard traumatic thing because it's made me who I am today. And I'm a person who works so hard, and I work so hard to be perfect, and I never stop, and I always try to be impressive. And my trauma helped me do that. And I've made a lot of money, and I'm very successful. And there's truth to that. Sometimes some of the symptoms you develop from trauma, like perfectionism and heavy control and never giving
Exactly.
up and
Exactly.
having to be first and fighting for what you want and fighting that good fight and like nobody else will and you do. You can gain some things from that, but I'll tell you, there's an awful lot of costs to that too, because people like that tend to
Exactly.
struggle with relationships. They tend to struggle in relationships where you have to share. They struggle to relax. They struggle often with sleep. Sometimes they end
Exactly.
up using drugs or alcohol to cope and keep them going. And they are so
Exactly. Exactly.
perfectionistic
Exactly.
that the
Exactly.
judge, they have a judger inside them that's always cracking the whip. And you can live like that for a while, but I'll tell you that gets very hard. And sometimes diseases, physical diseases, develop because a
Exactly.
nervous system
Exactly.
is so hard
Exactly.
on itself and so hard on the person. And these are people who've never experienced an opportunity to have someone say, you can sit, you can rest, you can be whoever you are, and I will still care about you.
Yes.
You don't have to push so hard,
Exactly.
and you're still going to be as good as ever. That's so crazy. That's so brand new to them. So that's
Exactly.
part of their work if they
Even if
choose to do it.
exactly. Exactly. And
What were you going to say
sometimes,
there, even if?
like you're so very much right about your I'm just saying that even okay, I was formulating my own thoughts. Okay, let me say that
Yeah.
sometimes your problem, like you said, that your trauma is a part of your personality. You inculcate that problem into your personality. So it doesn't mean that it's a healthy personality. Being a perfectionist, being number one is not going to pay you off. At the end of the day, you would be alone, like you said that. If we see, like in the profession of that media or those people who are, celebrities, they go through a lot of
Right,
problems, and underlying
right,
they had a lot of trauma as well. So just to encounter that trauma, just to encounter, sometimes there are a lot of individuals who were not blessed when they were young. They had a very problematic life. They struggled a lot. They were poor. And nobody was paying attention to them
yes,
because maybe there were 5 to 6 siblings and nobody was paying attention to them. Nobody was listening to them. So they developed that
right.
kind of hatred thing
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
toward themselves, toward other people, and they start building
yeah,
up their self. And they start building up their self and they start getting attention from that. Then there is a time
right.
came when people are not paying attention to you because you have done a lot in small period of time and your
Right,
story is
right.
over then those people get into
Yeah,
trouble at that time. And I have
right,
seen these
right,
people
right,
fighting with the people who are commenting on these things and saying things
right.
like that, fighting just like a child. Why you did this? No, you are
Yeah,
not doing that. What you did? Why don't you get
right,
some kind of,
right,
why don't you win some fight? Or why don't you have any kind of
right.
award and stuff like that? So Like you said that
Right.
at the end of the day you're alone.
Yeah.
You just develop inculcating your troubles in your life doesn't mean that you're a healthy personality. You have to work through these trauma and you have to work through these emotions as well.
Right. Some people after trauma feel like emotions don't matter, and in fact, emotions are weak, or feeling afraid is weakness. So I never feel afraid, and I don't let things get me down. And really, that's not a healthy part of them. Helping them cope with that. That's actually like an escape. That's like fight and freeze come in to help them not feel things. But eventually, I find nervous systems, you can only do that for so long, and then you get tired, or you get sick, or you get sad being alone because nobody likes you. People who go through trauma, a lot of times their self-esteem takes a big hit, and so they feel like, I don't matter.
Exactly.
I'm not safe anymore. I can't help myself. No one else can help me. Nobody listens to me. I'm not worth being heard. And that obviously impacts self-esteem. So some people will get low and depressed about that, but other people will compensate and say, I'll make myself rich, and that will make me a good person. Or I'll make myself the smartest person in the room, and then I can feel good about myself. And they get so like committed to that, almost addicted to that they're not very likable, because that's all they think about. And really what's going on there is a part of them is so hungry to know that they matter, to know that they're okay just as they are, to know that they're worth being listened to. But they don't, but they've never had that experience. And so therapy helps them, their nervous system, to be able to even tolerate being heard, tolerate being liked, because they're just so addicted to go, 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 go. And it really does become like an addiction. Perfectionism is kind of like an addiction, And so sometimes people aren't great candidates for trauma therapy because they're so addicted to the way they're coping with their trauma. That's all they see. Sometimes narcissism starts from that,
Exactly, that is the point.
and really serious personality disorders can start from that. But there are a lot of people who, might even be listening to this and saying, yeah, my self-esteem, I did go through some things, and I minimized them because nobody really told me or made me feel like, that mattered. But when I realized that that stuff matters, and it changes my brain, and it changes my nervous system, and it changes my sense of myself, and I struggle every day. And maybe therapy is something I can begin to be curious about. I don't have to run into the therapist and, embrace it all. You can take your time, and a lot of times after trauma, people need to get used to therapy. And I let my clients know that's really safe.